Hi again then guys, and welcome to another car review, of course, from Dirt Rally 2.0, and if you're already on the Discord chat, you will have seen some of my thoughts in recent weeks about this particular car. Of course, the Aston Martin Vantage Group 4 version. One of 4 Rally GT machines to be in the game as standard with no DLC. You've got this, the BMW M2, the Chevy Camaro, and of course the Ford Mustang. Now the interesting thing in this category is that it varies a lot more than most of the categories do in terms of power. In fact, the difference between the most and least powerful of these 4 is 100 horsepower. That's a massive difference. The BMW is the least powerful with 400 horses, and then all the way up to the Mustang with 500. That's a pretty huge difference. So how can that be fair? Well, as you would assume, correctly so, it's weight. The difference between the weight of the vehicles is also massive. For instance, the weight of the Mustang, the most powerful, is also by far the highest, over 3,400 pounds, whereas the Beamer weighs 2,600. Massive difference to make up for the power. Plus, of course, with the Camaro and the Mustang, they are much physically larger. Now, I am going to review those cars separately, so I don't want to talk about those too much, but as far as the Aston goes, it was, and I'm sure this was the case for many of you as well, the first of these cars that I actually drove, because having an Aston Martin rally car, regardless of the game, is just inherently cool to me. Of course I'm going to try that one first, because I love Astons, it's cool to have an Aston on-road or off-road, so why not give it a try? So that's exactly what I did, and the first time that I drove it, it was actually on a Tarmac Rally in Spain, which seemed like a good idea, because if nothing else, at least driving the car on tarmac is closer to home for something like a GT, rather than, for instance, Australia or a snow circuit would be. Now, with that being said, tarmac or otherwise, this is a challenging car. It's not as big as the Camaro or the Mustang, as I said. It is bigger than the Beamer, not by a huge amount, but this is a vehicle which I would say falls into an interesting category of cars that I've talked about, not just in this game, but even in Gran Turismo, Forza. To me, it actually applies to everything, even to real life. And that is, there are 2 types of challenging car. There's the one type, which is worth the effort, and there's another type, which isn't. There are certain cars which aren't just challenging, they're just bad. They have bad handling, bad performance, the kind of thing where no matter how well you drive it, it's just never a good car. Those don't tend to be performance cars, because most performance cars are more refined than that, but even so, you can make an argument that some performance cars are just not very good. Then you have the other category, and the other category is what I would put stuff like the Lancia Stratos and the Shelby Cobra into. Are they challenging? Absolutely. They are very challenging to drive, they handle like little else on the road, or off the road in this case, but they're really good cars. The Cobra is one of the fastest sports cars of all time, and the Stratos is one of the most legendary and most successful rally cars of all time. So being challenging is not a bad thing for those cars. Even in, for instance, the hot hatch world, the Renault Clio V6, it's known for being more challenging than most hot hatches. It's rear-wheel drive instead of front, the engine's in the back instead of the front, etc. Now this, to me, falls into the side of being challenging, but worth it, and that's a good thing. Now, another thing that I would say about the Aston is that for all of its power and all of its performance and all of its challenging nature, and sometimes it will annoy you, as any of these GTs can, having that much power and torque going through only the rear wheels, especially off-road or in the wet, for instance, well, it's going to annoy you. You're going to make a cheap mistake somewhere, or maybe feel that the game has cheated you in some way, and you will get annoyed with it. I've been annoyed with every vehicle in the game that I've driven at one point or another. But one of the most redeeming features about that in the case of this Aston is that because it's challenging but good when driven well, it is fast, it is highly maneuverable, and it is highly competitive. That to me means that if you can master this car in, for instance, all scenarios, dirt, snow, gravel, tarmac, wet tarmac, if you can really get a handle on making this car perform well through corners, on straights, then everything else will feel easy in comparison. And that is the beautiful thing about a challenging car, because if you start with an easy car and then move your way up, it will get harder and harder. And the problem with that is the AI is also getting harder and harder. So as you are getting to learn more difficult vehicles, you're also going up against more difficult competition. So my advice for a new player, for instance, which doesn't apply as much now that the game is, what, you know, a year old, 2 years old, whatever it is, but still, drive a more challenging car as early on as you can, because that's exactly what I did in this game. You start the game, of course, with the Lancia Fulvia, which is very easy to drive if a little underpowered, but then, very quickly, I went to a time trial and drove this Aston. Now, it was a pain in the backside to first drive. That much power going from the Lancia with a tiny, underpowered front-wheel drive chassis, a very compact, lightweight car, to this big, wide, powerful, roaring Aston. Of course it was challenging. But then, when I mastered this car around that wet circuit, or wet stage I should say, in Spain, going back to the Lancia, I was flying through corners in that Fulvia after because it felt so easy in comparison. So a car like this is good, and it can certainly win, but it also trains you to drive other cars and be more proficient with them because they feel so easy. Not just front-wheel drive, but even other rear-wheel drive cars, and of course all-wheel drive. You go into this and then drive a WRC, it feels like a god-tier vehicle in comparison to this. This is fast, but it's certainly not a beginner-friendly vehicle. Now beyond that, what I will say is that despite how challenging the overall Rally GT category can be, and certainly it can be very challenging under the right or wrong circumstances depending on how you want to look at it, wet mud for instance, or snow, or even wet tarmac, what I will say is this Aston is, in my opinion, one of the best all-rounders in the category, certainly when you don't include DLC, because of course something like a Porsche 911, chances are it's going to be competitive, probably challenging but competitive because that's just what the 911 is. This one though has a very good middle ground. It's more powerful and more grunty than, for instance, the BMW, but it's lighter and more compact than the big American pony cars from Chevy and Ford. So they have the sheer power, but let's be honest, it's a rally game. It's not Pikes Peak, so having 450, 500 horsepower, it means very little when you're, for instance, flying through a forest in a rear-wheel drive car in the middle of Australia. You cannot use 500 horsepower, it's as simple as that. So you could sometimes get a 200 or 300 horsepower car far more rapidly through those corners than a big 500 horsepower Mustang. And of course I'll speak more to that when I do review those cars as well, but that's my point about the Aston. To me, it falls in a very good middle ground. It's not the biggest, most powerful, most cumbersome thing around, but it's not quite the smallest and most underpowered either. It's got a good combination. It's got, of course, that 4.7 litre V8 engine, which happens to sound very nice as well, 440 horsepower, it only weighs 2,866 pounds, which is just over 200 pounds more than the Beamer and a lot less than both the Camaro and the Mustang. Of course, they're all front-engine rear-wheel drive as standard in this category, but overall, that is a good place to be. The Beamer's got 400 horses, Camaro's got 460, Mustang has 500, Aston has 440, so it's right in the middle ground. To me, this is a very dependable choice to go for, so give it a try. But overall, that's it for this pick. Of course, stick around on the channel for more car reviews, and give me your thoughts on the Vantage down below. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.